Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized Truth Survives. We think we're on episode 65, which is really phenomenal. We've been pausing the full-length episodes to do some breaking news because there's been so much we wanted to inform y'all on. But here we are back with a full-length episode, and I don't think it's going to disappoint. The heart of what we do is bringing people globally together to see what this war for our minds looks like. And I don't think anybody's going to be bummed at this episode. We deliver an incredible view from Eastern Europe on the psychocults that are attacking people's brains there with our friends from Canaries in the Net podcast out of the Czech Republic. Alex Alvarova, who you guys might remember from episode 15, and her partner, Josef Holy. And they are doing incredible work. They have hundreds of thousands of listeners, and they tip them off to the attacks that are ongoing there, very similar to what we suffer from here with various psychocults. So that's coming up. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Very, very, very good interview.
Really. Yeah. It's exciting because they show the different techniques that are being used there, which are very similar to the techniques that are being used here. And isn't it interesting that some of the same network of people behind the various cognitive, attacks on people's brains in Eastern Europe matches up to what we have here in America? Isn't that shocking? All right, guys, let's jump into Front Loaded.
Front Loaded.
So I've been calling the attempted capture by the authoritarian right fascism since November 9th, 2016, because I'm German American and maybe I had a bit of a different perspective, but I'm not afraid to use my words. So because I have hundreds of new supporters at my Heidi Cuda Substack, I put together a list of the most important investigations I produced over the last 2 years so new readers can see the scope of what we are fighting. So that's a collection of interviews I did with Jim, interviews I did with Dave Troy, interviews I did with Ruth Ben-Ghiat, interviews with Jason Stanley, just to show people what's happening, what the scope of it is, what the history and the origins are, which will, I think, allow people to be better warriors and how they expend their energy and what they choose to do in their communities to fight the fascist creep. So that is... that's the first item. Anything, or should I just keep moving?
Let's keep moving.
All right, right on. Next story, reversing history, the U.S. authoritarians' rights war on LGBTQ plus people. So RadPod viewers will recall after years of reporting about Roe being overturned, on the day it occurred, I was warning people for years leading up to it. Hey guys, pay attention. Hey, pay attention. Here's what you can do. Nobody listened. It was overturned. But our viewers will recall that Jim, the very next day or same day, said it's not going to stop there. The gay community is going to be attacked next. And I did a report which showed the nationwide attacks, the hundreds and hundreds of bills in all the states going after people in very much the same way that the authoritarian right was attacking Roe. And why it's so important is it's very vital to realize that when the authoritarian right does these attacks, these are unpopular policies. The majority of people do not have any problems with the gay community or the trans community. These are values that are unreflective of American values. And so I want people to get into their heads to stop being bullied and to stand beside everybody who is othered. And which brings me to my next story. I hold bi-monthly speakeasy forums with guests for my Substack, and we had David Pepper on. He wrote The Laboratories of Authoritarianism, and he gave us actual action steps that we can do in our communities where we can start focusing on our state houses, and we can focus on things that we can tangibly do in our own communities to beat back the authoritarian right's unpopular policies. And I think we have evidence in recent weeks of what happens when people realize their power. Look what happened in Tennessee. not only did people rise up and realize their power, and in Wisconsin, but now there is sunlight on the egregious politicians in Tennessee that they did not probably really want. So it's like we have the power and we need to exercise it. And that's what I kind of wanted to bring home on Front Loaded this week. Lastly, a story dropped Monday in Byline Supplement, and I'm bringing it up because I actually used fact-based evidence to show just how done Trump is, because corporate media still seems to be a bit addicted to him. But looking at facts, following the metrics, you will see that he is done. He's not our problem. Let's move on and see what's coming next. And I just wanted to bring that up. Jim or Hi-Fi?
So seems to me that we should have picked Streisand effect for word phrase of the week, because you mentioned Tennessee, and my goodness, thank you to the Tennessee House Republican Party for demonstrating how the Streisand effect works. They took two immensely talented young men that nobody had ever heard of and thrust them into the national spotlight to be fucking superstars for decades. So good job, Tennessee House GOP. Keep trying to cancel people. I think that's going to work out for you.
Well, they just elected the team captains for what's about to happen.
Exactly. Like, thanks, guys. I mean, but by the way, like, how are these? I mean, both of them insanely brilliant, talented orators, man. Like, both Justins are just badasses.
Yeah.
Very, very. It gave me some hope, and that the young people may actually be able to save us if we could just fucking hold on for a few more years.
Yeah, right. Yes, and why I wanted to tip people off to my report in Byline Supplement on Trump being the biggest loser is because I looked at 2018, 2020, 2022. I looked at the poll, 25% that he's getting a favorability, which is, underwater, the lowest he's gotten since, 2015, 2016. And I think it's really important that we are not bamboozled by corporate media anymore. I think that's part of what our problem has been. And it's interesting that I reported on April 4th how Trump's not even covered in legit media anymore. And what happens? They immediately prop him up on Fox. The disgraced network, has had to start, dragging him out again. And I just, I want people to just start to step into their power. There are so many more of us who believe in the American values of diversity, inclusion, empathy, kindness, and not being hateful. And I think it's, critical that we stop, believing in the unreality that corporate media and the Trumpists are still trying to push on us. Right on. So we got through Front Loaded. Let's move on to Word Phrase of the Week.
All right, word phrase of the week this week. We're going to talk about algocracy. And what is algocracy? Well, algocracy, known by another name, is government by algorithm. And this is an important term and an important thing for people to understand. And it's probably best expressed by the French film Alphaville, in which, everything is predetermined by algorithm. And if you look at some of the things that have been going on, such as data gathering, data targeting, one could argue that what a capitalist surveillance state is putting in place is algocracy, or government by algorithm, in which people are manipulated online.
Well, I mean, social media is an algocracy, right? Social media was designed by sociopaths to radicalize people. It's an algorithm that was intentionally put in place to get people pissed off, because that way you can profit from their anger, and as a bonus, you can subvert democracy. So the entire social media fabric, I hate to say, was Facebook, Twitter, it was all put in place, frankly, without our best interests at heart. And what we need to do is regulate social media like it was a vital human service, which it is. The internet is no longer something you pay $19.99 for when you get it on a CD from AOL. It's fucking how you live now. And we need to start treating it that way.
Well, your framing as a public utility has been brilliant. That's what I've been using all the time. Have people start thinking of it as a public utility and have it regulated as such. And I'm glad you brought that term up, because our upcoming guest, Josef Holy, is the author of the term algocracy, the dictate of automated agenda setting. So we're going to be talking more about that. So I think it's time for Why It Matters. Hi-Fi.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? By High Fidelity.
First story this week, we're going to talk about deep fake news. That's right. Down in Venezuela, they are using deep fake videos to promote false stories about a ramping up in Venezuelan tourism. This, of course, is untrue. However, videos have been posted to multiple YouTube news sites and have been shared all over social media. I do believe we warned people this was coming quite a while ago. Don't know what to tell you on this one, except that's why it matters.
I think it's important, Hi-Fi, that you had the concept of watermarking AI, like anything AI has to be watermarked. Like all the things that we worry about have simple fixes, and we just seem to not have the desire to interrupt capitalism in any way in order to basically, save civilization.
I mean, it would be very easy to institute some regulatory solutions that are simple, right? If you post AI without a watermark, you're fined. The social media platform, whatever, that allowed you to post that AI video without a watermark is fined. I mean, just make it punitive to attempt to trick people this way. It's very simple.
Yeah, you would think it's simple, but the whole point of it is to evade things like that, right? And it's getting to the point where, it's going to be hard to make a determination whether something is real or not. I do want to point out one other meme that's going around in terms of AI, and it's being spread by Elon Musk and Mike Flynn and like all of the big players. And it is that you should be terrified of AI. Okay. So yes, there are real concerns, and Hi-Fi just laid some of those out. But AI isn't going to kill you. It's not turning into people anytime soon. It's still just a very, very fancy autocomplete. It's still the same fucking thing as you have on your phone, except bigger. So, you type a word and it says the next word, like, here are the guesses. It's a fancy version of that, and it's still a fancy version of that. It imitates human beings very well, and it can do all kinds of parlor tricks, like create songs based on your input and stuff like that. It's very cool parlor trick. It is not coming to kill you. The reason that they want you to think that is because they want to control it, because they don't want to regulate it. They don't want to have watermarks on it. They don't want to have all the shit that we need in order to be able to distinguish fact from fiction, because they want to determine what the fact is and what the fiction is, and we shouldn't let them.
That was awesome, Hi-Fi. Let's keep moving.
All right. Next story this week comes from our friend, Dr. Emma Bryant. Fort Gamergate and the failure of the software siege. And Dr. Emma Bryant in this story writes about, OG Thug Shaker who leaked classified documents in a Discord server which made their way online, were altered by apparently Russian intelligence, leaked by propagandists. But what she really goes into in this article that I think is very, very important about what this young man has done here is that There are software companies like Palantir who have taken in millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer money to provide systems that are supposed to identify insider threats with regards to documents, classified documents, and their access. They were defeated by a young gamer with his telephone and a Discord server. So I think that's a real example of something that needs addressed in our government.
Well, yeah, I mean, remember, we had somebody in power for 4 years whose job was to make us less secure, right? So any of the initiatives that were going to, you know, help fix cyber, remember, we were going to do cybersecurity with Putin.
Oh, I remember that. Oh, yeah. I'm not forgetting any of it, Jim.
That's a great idea.
There's a reason why our systems are all fucked up, is because for 4 years, there was a bunch of people in there whose job it was to fuck them up. And so we need to start paying some attention to these systems. I completely agree. And, you know, I will be talking about Mr. Teixeira and Hellscape.
Just not for nothing. I just feel like, you know, when is somebody going to realize that we don't really need to put everything on the internet, particularly when we're dealing with national security? It's like, really, we haven't learned that yet. Like the NSA hack a decade ago was not like a big enough tell. Like, you know, what is?
It wasn't just the NSA. It was also the DIA, which who was doing that fucking shit. Mike Flynn.
I know.
Well, I would like to point out between that story and our next story, it's really what our nation needs collectively is a Peter Thiel moment. And I would.
Oh, hi. Thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
Never gets old. Never gets old.
And the reason I do that, because our next story this week is over in the UK, Palantir, who was inserted into the NHS to help track COVID data, is actually tracking multiple kinds of data. Including mental health data, history of STI vaccinations, all sorts of information that really doesn't have anything to do with COVID. And I find it interesting that the NHS and the UK government is allowing this to occur, considering that Peter Thiel has openly stated, I want to get in there and tear the NHS apart.
Well, I mean, you can ask the same question about every 3-letter agency in the United States. They're all infested with that shit. Let me be super clear. Palantir, here's the reason, and by the way, it's billions that Palantir has taken in. And part of the reason for that is Palantir got a bunch of contracts in the 2000s. Guess who he got contracts for the fucking Defense Department for Afghanistan. Because guess who? Eric Prince and Mike Flynn were pushing for Palantir, this tiny little startup that no one had ever heard of, but Peter Thiel was running, suddenly got all these fucking contracts. Yeah. And now, and guess what? Palantir is now all infested in the government and needs to be taken out with fire.
I was hiking when I was listening to the audio version of the Peter Thiel book, and when it got to the point where it was like Mike Flynn who orchestrated that, I like literally freaking almost fell over. I was like, oh my God, like it just never stops. This would be a good time.
Well, I'm going to go geek for a second here, right? Just as a tech guy, when we're trying to do upgrades, we have 2 paths that we can generally take, right? And one is we do an upgrade in place where piece by piece, we slowly upgrade a system to get it to its desired end state. And then there's also a process called rip and replace, in which we simply rip a system out completely, turn it off, it's done, and then put the new one in wholesale. Normally, I'm an advocate for upgrade in place because it just makes things smoother. In this case, I would advocate for a rip and replace. That's all.
Oh, I love that. What a great theme. That was so easy to visualize it. I love that. But I also want to say, back to what I was speaking about earlier, we are a global show. So I would think this would be a really great time just to show that quick clip from our friend Jason Williamson from Sleaford Mods on what has happened to the UK politically and the chaos because these networks have been infiltrating their government. Would love for you just to kind of tell people about it, a bit about it, and then let us know how the shows are going in America, kind of what you're feeling.
UK Grim was just it's just like a post-pandemic album about just a continuation of what all the albums have been really tried to achieve, are just snapshots of the here and now of when it was recorded. And a lot of those albums, all of them lean to the politics of that time. And UK Grim isn't any different, really. You know, our government has completely broken down. It's like a headless snake. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's completely out of control. It's transparently corrupt, and it's really weighing heavy on the psychology of the English public, the country, really.
Why does that sound so familiar?
Sounds so familiar. It's like we got it in the Czech Republic. We got it in fucking Ukraine. We got it, I mean, it's
Estonia.
It's a goddamn scourge, and we need to start talking about it.
That's right.
Really,
I love the line "transparently corrupt." And again, for our friends who did not see that newsbreaker, that was Jason from Sleaford Mods, my favorite freaking artist right now. More of that, please. More people willing to speak truth to power in that way. And yeah, so back to Hi-Fi and Jim's original point, it's like, what happens when these bad actors get these contracts? Oh, guess what? Chaos and destabilization and liberal democracy. Surprise. You know, privacy infiltration. Surprise. Which brings us, I think, as the perfect segue to Hellscape.
Jim Stewartson's Hellscape. Oh, fuck.
So it's been quite adventurous out there of late. So just to kind of set a little bit, so for the last 3 months, I've been back on Twitter under an enormous amount of caveats that I don't want to be there. I think it's a fucking neo-Nazi indoctrination platform, and that anyone who doesn't have a purpose to be on Twitter should not be there. You should not be there just to consume information, because you're just consuming bullshit. It is designed to radicalize and brainwash you. So you either need to know what you're doing or go somewhere else. Go to Mastodon or somewhere where it's not, where there isn't a 4chan troll running it, right? But one of the things that it does give me is access to lots and lots of criminals that I am interested in putting away. So there was this document leak recently that Hi-Fi mentioned in Why It Matters. The document leak itself came from a 21-year-old guy named Jack Teixeira, who had access to a bunch of classified material and shared it to a small group of people that he was supposedly trying to impress. Over half of whom were foreign nationals, including people from Russia, in his insulated little group. Soon after that, it got shared to larger Discord, where there were hundreds or thousands of people who had access to it. And it got this classified material that Jack Teixeira stole from the government, ended up getting posted on Telegram by this person. So her screen name is Donbas Devushka. And Donbas Devushka turns out to be actually a divorcee from New Jersey, who was in the Navy when she started spreading the most blatant, pathetic Kremlin propaganda that there is. Just the worst pro-Putin, pro-Kremlin, pro-Wagner group garbage that you can possibly imagine. So one of the advantages I have of being on Twitter is that I pay attention, very close attention, to people like Joe Flynn. And part of the reason I pay attention to Joe is he makes lots of mistakes and does lots of stupid shit that I get to then report on. For example, Joe tweeted this very strange quote tweet to the aforementioned Donbass Devushka. And he did this on April 4th of this year. And it's a weird tweet, like, end the slaughter. He's never said anything like this before. Why? Like, it's a very strange tweet about Wagner capturing part of Bakhmut, which is complete Kremlin propaganda. And Joe Flynn decided to quote tweet it. And I called him out. I was like, why is Joe Flynn promoting this Ministry of Defense propaganda account, which is basically what she was running? Well, so that was April 4th, but Devushka first published her this classified documents on the 5th. So the question arises, why did Joe Flynn, the brother of Mike Flynn and the brother of Charles Flynn, who runs 90,000 troops in U.S. Army Pacific, why did he promote that account less than 24 hours before that account distributed incredibly sensitive, damaging, classified information that would damage the United States and Ukraine? Why? There are two possibilities. One, it was a coincidence. Just a random coincidence that out of all the accounts on the fucking internet, Joe Flynn picks the one by happenstance who is going to publish Kremlin stolen propaganda or propaganda to benefit the Kremlin the next day. You can believe that if you like. Or you can look at the history of the Flynn family and their history with classified documents. Anybody remember Snowden? Edward Snowden, who stole classified documents from General Flynn's top secret DIA servers to distribute to Glenn Greenwald and WikiLeaks. How about 2016, where the fucking GRU, Mike Flynn's best friends, by the way, where the GRU stole emails from the DNC, specifically John Podesta, and what did he do? He started Pizzagate through what? WikiLeaks. It is the same pattern over and over again. What else did Mike Flynn do? Mike Flynn had Ezra Cohen-Watnick, who was on the National Security Council because of Mike Flynn, steal classified documents to give to Kash Patel, who was working for Kremlin Congressman Devin Nunes. The Flynn family uses classified information all the time to attack their enemies. All the time. So when Joe Flynn magically finds the account that is going to the next day put out classified information to help our enemies, I have questions. A lot of questions, Joe Flynn. So you can come and you can fucking, troll us all you want. But she has good stuff which is the only response that Joe Fleet has given me, is not good enough. There are going to be investigations into why it is that you knew about that account before it published classified documents. Arrest all Flynns.
As you know, being a veteran investigative reporter, I don't really believe in coincidences. And so it's kind of like when Joe tweeted for my arrest and there was a coordinated harassment campaign that ensued against me. Doesn't seem like a coincidence. So thank you for that, Jim. How wonderful that someone like you stays on top of this shit. This is just the perfect place to introduce our guests. Alvarova Josef Holy. They do the Czech language podcast, Canaries in the Net. They are propaganda researchers. Josef is a digitalist social media algorithms expert. He works with companies in Silicon Valley and the Czech Republic. And they are going to be telling us about some of the psyoping that's going on in Eastern Europe. So let's bring him right in. We are so excited to have Alvarova back with us. As you guys know, last year we interviewed her. She has a really unique perspective, having grown up in Soviet era Czech Republic. And so she knows all about disinformation and has done so much work in not only the books that she writes, but also in her activism, trying to enlighten people about it. And her partner in their podcast, Canaries in the Net, Josef Holy, is here with us as well. They have done dozens of podcasts, primarily in the Czech language, so they could enlighten people what to look out for, because as we talk about on this show, the disinformation assaults, the cognitive warfare is global. And I'm so glad to have these two with us today, because your podcast has reached 400,000 listeners. And I think that's incredible. What a service that you're doing to try to enlighten people on what to look out for. It should be noted that they do have an episode in English where they interviewed our friend, I like to call him Sir Tuomas Ilves, the former president of Estonia. So please do check that out, Canaries in the Net. And can you guys please give our viewers a brief introduction, and then we're going to jump into what you are learning.
Okay, thank you for having us. Thank you, guys. Nice to see you again. Joseph, you should say something. Okay. Don't let it on me.
Okay, I was waiting for you to give an introduction. Sorry for that. So hi, everyone, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, actually, the one episode you mentioned with Mr. Ilves, we were intending to do more in English, but we are still very much busy with preparing the episodes in Czech. And while our Czech audience is growing, and like we didn't expect when we started during COVID such a success. So we are still committed to deliver the service to educate the Czech people about information warfare, because in the Baltic states and in the Middle Europe, this is where it all started actually decade ago. Our first large information operation on our territory was already 2007, I think, 2008. It was connected to the at that time, Obama's administration considered to place on the Czech territory the American radar. It was a complicated story. I don't want to go too deep into it. And Russians obviously didn't like that activity too much. They organized a huge information operation where they collected email addresses, telephone numbers, and data of people who they knew they were loyal to the previous communist regime, or who don't like America, or who they remembered they were friends in the era where they have their military bases on the Czech territory. So there were, I think, 4 of them. I'm not sure anymore. 4 former Soviet military bases. And the people who lived around those bases, around these military, I don't know how to call it. The Czech people who lived around were pretty much friends with the Soviet soldiers, and these friendships were some kind of physical base, contact base they used while creating that huge, their first data to create a pool of people who didn't like America, who have kind of nostalgia for the old good times. And they organized an excessive operation in the media, human protests, people writing to the letters to the deputies, to the members of parliament, following and bashing the prime minister for organizing the talks with the Americans. And it was everywhere. It looked so omnipresent and pervasive that you couldn't practically open the can of something and that the radar was jumped suddenly. That it was the agenda setting number one we perceived in that era. And finally, what they did only rely on their first Facebook and social media primitive channels. That was their first use of Facebook. They have different mail lists and trying to innovate a bit. But what they did for the first time was the Berlusconi was the prime minister at that time in Italy, and he invited our prime minister for his private to his private villa in Tuscany. And someone, surprise, made photos of the Czech prime minister being naked on the backyard. And it went all over the media. It was something like, hey, look at him, look at his thing. Oh, how funny. And it was the absolute end of any radar talk and also the absolute end of that prime minister. So that was the peak of the first ever successful information operation on the Czech territory. And then
thank you so much. I want to just around that same time, Estonia was also being attacked. So what I think is such an advantage from the information we can get from you is that before it came to America, this type of warfare was refined in Russia. It was refined in other places in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and then it came here, and that has given you guys such great insight into what's going on. And can you please give our viewers who may not have seen your original episode what it was like to grow up in Soviet era Czech Republic and why you are so aware of cognitive warfare?
Joseph, you
yes.
want to start?
Yeah, I can start. Although I was a little kid before the Soviet Union fell and before the Berlin Wall fell, etc. But basically, how it was a totality, although people didn't believe in it anymore. So it was not like this full-scale Orwellian totality where people would be fully manipulated. But there was a huge information monopoly from the Communist Party. We are talking, of the years between 1948 till 1989, right? So you have basically 40 years, let's say 2-3 generations of people growing up in the system, not having access to foreign, Western, basically, information sources. Everything is censored. There is in the first half of that, let's say during 50s, you would have a really tough Stalinist regime, right? Where there was a huge fear among people. You would have like these big processes of, with different, opposition leaders at the time. Sometimes they were just, made up just to scare people. So you would have really like a Stalinist regime in the 50s in Czechoslovakia. And then in 60s, this would loosen up and people would basically start to think about, okay, how can we give the socialism sort of a human face, right? How can we refactor it and make it more viable for people, more democratic, if you will? So this peaked in 1968 when basically, all these reforms were about to take place. And when on the 21st of August, 1968, Russian or basically Warsaw Pact, not just Russian, but the Warsaw Pact armies, entered the country and basically installed back loyal communist regime, right? So then you would have like 70s would be called normalization, because what communists did, they said, we need to normalize the conditions, we need to normalize the regime. So that's why 70s and 80s were called normalization, where people were scared, some people were fired off. Those leaders of the 60s Reformation efforts were sort of fired off their work. Their kids couldn't, study and all that stuff, right? Because they don't punish, totality don't punish just you. It punishes also your kids, right? That's how they basically, keep you in the line, right? Because sometimes some people.
That was my case.
Exactly. Some people could make a sacrifice, like sacrifice their career if they believe that something is good, but it's much harder to sacrifice your children's, livelihoods, right? Sort of not livelihoods, but like the careers and perspective for the future. So we would again, you would have from the information warfare perspective, you would have a propaganda, right? Clear propaganda, anything what you could read in the newspapers, anything what you could see in the TV. There was only one TV, which was state TV. So you could just see how communist regime is, successful, that we are producing, zillions tons of iron and having a really good agriculture and all that stuff, right? It was all made up because the system wouldn't work, because it was centrally planned. You would have a centrally planned economy, which we were in a much better shape in Czechoslovakia than, for example, Soviet Union. In Soviet Union, it didn't work at all, obviously, and actually we were one of their satellite states, as it's called, where basically we would be supplying Russia.
Colonies, basically colonies.
We were sort of a colony, exactly. And so that basically resulted in two effects for our current world, so to speak, right? One is that you still have certain generations who grew up in that system, and although they didn't believe, this is important, right? Since 60s, 70s, people didn't believe in the system. They were just, some of them entered Communist Party, or actually a lot of them, just to have a career, just to have a possibility to grow up in their careers, right? But they didn't believe in it. But still, as you would have the omnipresent propaganda, it basically, changes your brain, right? The effect of information warfare and of propaganda is that it sort of, catches in your brain. You have mere exposure effect, which basically says that anything you are exposed to somehow gets captured in your neural network on this level, right? So then these people would grow up, they would be young, they would get married, they would start families, they would live their lives. Their lives were not so bad, right? We didn't have like famines or anything, but we couldn't go to West, we couldn't travel, and you couldn't publicly tell other people what you really think. So you would be talking about political affairs and what you really think about communist regime in your homes behind closed doors. So they wouldn't believe, but still it somehow got into their brains. So now, as they grew older, right, now we are talking about people in their 60s, 70s, who were like 30, 40 years old when the communist regime fell in 89. These people, we can say, were sort of vaccinated by the disinformation or propagandist virus to a certain extent. They, on one hand, now they tell you that they hate communists, but on the other hand, they spread pretty much Kremlin propaganda through emails and social networks, basically. So this is the situation we are in. And as Alex said, 2007 was really the first, case where Russian regime under Putin already executed a successful information operation, because basically when our allies, we were a part of NATO at that time already. So when our allies saw the resistance of the population, and it was not about placing nuclear warheads on our soil or anything. It was about placing a radar, which would be part of this protective umbrella. You guys may know that there was a talk that, United States wanted to build sort of this anti-missile umbrella over Europe, right? So there would be some facilities in Poland, some in Prague, or not Prague, but in Czech Republic, etc. So there was this resistance, and it was very visible. Most people would want the radar, but actually those with the agenda, right? And behind the scenes, the Russians were pushing the agenda, organizing protests and all that stuff. So eventually our allies pulled back, or United States pulled back and said that they will not build it. So that was a success from the Russians' perspective, of course.
I just want to add no one really from our allies at that time expected that you can create a fake grassroots movement by solely propaganda means or information op. And it really worked. It looked like it wasn't that much people actually, but it looked omnipresent. It looked like an entire nation is against the radar, and the people around in the countries around us were like, what? Why did the Czechs actually want into NATO when they are so much anti-American, right? So that was really a successful op. They know their shit.
Right. So what I wanted to say is that back to Joseph, what he said that really I think is a very critical point for our viewers is it changes your brain. So not only does the propaganda change your brain, but those of us who are aware of these operations, who fight it, it also changes our brain. For example, this morning I saw an op being run on people, and I had to jump in to try to deflect it because I'm not able to just, tell myself, don't waste your time, don't waste your energy, keep moving forward. No, I felt I had to intercede to try to deflect it. So it not only changes the brains of the people who are unaware that we're engaged in cognitive warfare, it also changes the brain of those of us who fight it. And I think that because it's so invisible to so many people, it's very, very sinister. And why it's so important that we're having you on the show, just like we bring in Zarina Zabriskie, who grew up in St. Petersburg and Odessa, is that you guys have seen this for decades. And Americans, in our naivete and in our, one of our lovely qualities is optimism, but our optimism is being exploited against us. Before we get into the ops being run currently in Eastern Europe, can you please wake up Americans to the fact that they are at war and their minds are the battlefield?
That's basically one thing. You Americans, you are terrific. You are good people. I've seen that before in Canada when I lived in Canada. You trust to each other, and that trust, you're not paranoid as us because we grew up during communist regime and with the Russians. And what I can remember when I was a kid, most of our games where we played the World War II. Someone was Russian partisan and someone was German, and then the spies and enemies, and we played that since we learned how to walk and talk. This is what we grew up in, constant war paranoia. They implied their warmongering culture on us. So we know, and actually we not only know, it's a part of our brain. So we are actually sick a little bit and infected a little bit with their way of thinking. It's paranoid. You trust one to another. Canadians, the same. People have no idea. It's even if you take the word the usage of the word misinformation and disinformation. Like disinformation implies a bad intent, like someone's gonna mindfuck your brain. And this is what we used in Europe because we know the Russians. We immediately adopted disinformation. No one knows the word misinformation. Here in America, in Canada, the prevalent term is misinformation because you expect no one can be that bad, right? Why would someone come and tell me lies? So that's the culture. And to destroy this culture of trust, that's their goal.
Right. I think that this is, I would double down on this, right? This is really important because when people ask me when I'm giving speeches, like to in different cities in Czech Republic and to schools, etc., people always ask, like, what is the goal of Russia? What is the goal of their information operations? So they are not naive. They are not pushing forward the agenda or like propaganda in a sense that Russia is the best. We all know how the life looks like in Russia, right? People don't have flushing toilets, basically, in most parts of the country. So no one really would want to live there. But so they are not pushing forward topics like that Putin is the best, etc. Although there is a fraction of people who may still believe that, but they are completely brainwashed. But what they are striving for is actually seed sort of a conflict into the society, right? Break the society apart. So any topic, this is important, right? Any topic which can sort of generate sort of heated discussions, disagreements, and polarization, essentially, is valuable. So it can be anything like from culture wars, like gender topics, what is the role of women in society and all that stuff. We are a bit behind you, right? So we are still going through certain transformations in terms of feminist movement or whatever. So these are the topics, right? Explanation of history, right? Even like there is still a topic here, like how did the World War II start and ended, as an example, because we've been fed for 40 years that Russian liberated us, but when you look at it from the distance, it was not liberation, it was the new capture, right? They already, agreed with the West that Stalin will take basically everything from Eastern Berlin to the East, including us, right? So you have like these topics, you have topics, the everyday topics related to, economy policy of government and all that stuff. Anything what can generate the disagreement is useful for them. And then, so these are like certain group of narratives, as we call, and then you have sort of long-running narratives, which have been running for the last 10 years, if you will, where anti-EU narratives, right? So we have like a bunch of narratives, anti-European Union narratives, where basically they say that whole Western Europe is already governed by Muslims, is broken, governed by Muslims because they accepted refugees from the Muslim countries.
The transgender people everywhere.
Transgender people everywhere, junkies everywhere, economy breaking up, euro will fall, very soon, etc. Then you have anti-NATO narratives, right? Anti-NATO narrative, the main one is that NATO is an aggressive pact, although we all know that NATO is a defense pact, right? I mean, like, so that NATO is that Russia, and another narrative, great one, is that Russia has never started any war, which goes to the extreme that now last year on the 25th or 24th of February they attacked Ukraine properly.
Yeah, NATO started it. NATO. If it weren't for NATO, there would be peace everywhere.
But it was their defense, right? They had to defend themselves because NATO was about to attack Russia. This is sort of, the narrative which they are feeding their own people. And then you have spill-offs of these narratives to the rest of the Europe, mostly Eastern Europe, as an example. And then just last thing, so you have like these narratives which try to disqualify or sort of paint in much worse colors, so to speak, the Western capitalism, Western structures. I mean, we can talk about deficiencies of European Union and NATO, etc., but it's still, the best what could happen to Europe, right? Otherwise, we would have wars, obviously. So they are trying to, sort of seed distrust to these institutions, to the country, international institutions, as well as to the institutions in the Czech Republic. We have, as an example, we have public service media, right, which are not government funded. They are funded from the contributions of the viewers. They are governed by very strong, ethic. Think of BBC, right? We have our own version of BBC, which is like highly quality. They have their own mistakes, but they are trying to really do the proper journalism. So in a sense, in the information space, public service media serve a purpose because they are sort of an anchor or a spine which you can get to and you can find the truth. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's you know that they are probably closest to the truth, right? If you take it philosophically. So public service media have been the first target of attack since for the last 15 years, right?
Wow.
They constantly repeat for 10 years, media is lying to you. Media is lying to you. Mainstream media, public media is lying to you.
I want to jump in and then I want to pass it to Jim and then high five. So what we realize here in doing interviews like this is part of the assault on liberal democracies globally. Exactly. It's being done through media. Our minds, again, are the battlefield of this. And I know that you guys in your diligent research have found very similar patterns like we have here with Jim's investigations on QAnon, you have your own version of that. Jim, I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, and then I want to hear how they're attacking people specifically in Eastern Europe with different cult-like organizations that are pushing the same narratives.
Yeah, well, one of the things that strikes me always is, you know, you talk about the media being lying to you, right? One of the more famous examples of that is the Lügenpresse, which was Hitler's term for the fake news, right? In many ways, what these narratives that we're seeing are narratives that were spread by the Nazi movements. They were anti-gay, and you know, they picked on all of the same vulnerable groups that these people are doing now. I'm curious, first of all, about any kind of similar narratives to the QAnon movement, and you've been following me, Alex, so I'm sure you've got some insights there. But I'm also interested in, are there Nazi elements that have been sort of sown in the Czech Republic as well as has been, you know, has been here? Because I've just been seeing a very, very substantial uptick in literal Nazi propaganda. And, you know, given the narratives that you're talking about, it all seems very sort of focused on creating a new Third Reich, frankly. So sorry for that sort of long introduction, but I just was curious to get your feedback.
Actually, we could mention Reichel, right?
Well, so I would not go so far in the Czech Republic to say that we see an uptake of Nazi propaganda or like really far right propaganda.
There is a constant stream, not moving up or down since the 90s. Like,
I think what they are doing, because we've been fed, right? Russians have fed us that Nazis were the bad guys, and they defeated the bad guys during the World War II. So it would be quite difficult to sort of mobilize people around that idea of far right movements. However, when you look on the main narratives which sort of underpin the far right movement, then you have like global conspiracy driven by Jews as an example, right? So George Soros, which you guys see in your far right media, he is everywhere, exactly. So, and even more in Slovakia, which is which are our former brothers from the Czechoslovakia before we split in '93. So you see that anti-Jewish sort of narratives quite a lot. Then you see a lot of like anti-Muslim narratives because they realized, or they know, of course, those who run those operations, that we have very homogeneous society, right? Our society is white, like the population in Czech Republic is like white.
And even nationally homogeneous. We have almost no foreigners on our territory, no foreign people, foreign languages.
White Christian.
Well, even Christianity is like 10% of people are, like practicing.
We are more those esoteric freaks. I believe in something spiritual, but no God. That's the basic Czech attitude, like atheist with some kind of esoteric calling. Right.
So you have like these narratives, like global conspiracy. You have Jewish, you have xenophobia. That's what I wanted to get to. That it's fairly easy in a society which is not exposed so much to diversity to sort of bring xenophobia into the play, which may be similar to certain states in the United States, as an example, right? In the Midwest, where you have, let's say, farmers, etc. They are living their lives there, and then it's fairly easy to sort of convince them that some outer forces are about to change the way their traditional values and whatnot, right? So to a certain extent, it's not like Nazi. I would not go that far, but it's about conservatism. It's about fear from diversity, from differences, from other cultures, and all that stuff. So this definitely is in the play here as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, that in-group, out-group rhetoric works on Czechs very well, because they were, except of Jews and a little bit of gypsies, there never ever lived any foreigners on our territory. The rest of the Germans around the border, we expelled on a very brutal way after the World War II. And then since the World War II, our territory is completely homogeneous Czech, no white, no nothing. So we are like those ghost hobbits.
very vulnerable to othering. I think it's very important we jump in and talk cult Alatra, especially reading from your research that RFK has been interviewed. I'm very concerned because when you brought that to my attention, I looked at their site and it looks like shiny, happy people having a good time. You go under the surface, you find climate denialism, you find Bannon, you find RFK. I just wanted to have them drill home that QAnon rhetoric and that type of attempt to radicalize people is everywhere, and sometimes it comes packaged as shiny, happy people.
Yeah, so we are talking Alatra, right? So Alatra, AWLATRA, it's spelled, is basically a spiritual movement originating from Russia and Ukraine, and it's and basically the main premise of it is that there should be no states. Just play Imagine by John Lennon, right, and just turn it into certain pieces of Imagine, turn it into a doctrine, right? So no states, no religions, no institutions, because we all are the same and we all want to live in the peace, in the peaceful world, right? So this is like, they have like their own 8 rules, or like 8 commandments, if you will, and it's all about, be nice to people, be creative, and we all want to live in the peace. So
there is, sorry about interrupting, there is also that big push to expand your consciousness,
absolutely,
to elevate your mind to a higher level, you have that powerful spirit inside of you. You just need to learn how to connect all the brains together. So
it sounds so nice, but what did you guys find out, and what are they doing in targeting Eastern Europe?
So it's interesting, right? So they are obviously using modern information platforms, including TikTok. So groups who are monitoring in our country, in our region, who are basically monitoring propaganda and disinformation. They see local Facebook groups in different regions, and the more you go to the east, the more popular it is. We are not talking about, I feel like, or based on what I know, QAnon hit quite large, part of the population. We have seen some American population, right? We have seen some research from back 2 years ago, I think, which was saying that basically 15 or 20% of American public, more Republicans than Democrats, obviously, so 15 or 20% believe in the key sort of narratives of QAnon. Not necessarily that the world is governed by the blood drinking cabal of pedophiles, but definitely that the world is driven by the background forces, by the deep states or whatnot, and that one day you will need to restore the order with your gun, with gun which you have in your household. So we don't see that in Alatra, like this big uptake, but it's sort of growing into the society because it's much more peaceful. We were, when you think about QAnon as sort of a very far right ideology, very far right cult, right? Xenophobic, anti-Jewish, basically very, very like masculine, because the core of people are the young, disoriented boys, young men with no future, who like to talk guns and freedom and cryptocurrencies or whatnot. Then on the other side, if you would put against it sort of the almost like a feminine or women power of empathy, peace, sort of a spiritual development and all that stuff, then you could compare these two. So one is masculine, and Alatra is more like, you know, feminine is the right word in English, right?
It's so new agey.
It's very new agey. Very new agey.
So
right?
much.
So no religions, but only old wisdom, right? So pre-religious wisdoms. Exactly, right? So and so you have so in Alatra you have it's getting weird, right? So QAnon, as you get deeper, it gets really weird, right? So you end up with the blood drinking cabal of pedophiles. So in Alatra, the world is driven and governed by archonites.
Archons.
Archons.
Archons, yes.
ARCONS, archons.
Yes.
No, ARCHON.
Oh, CH, archon.
Archons,
something like that. And this is like these are the invisibles, and all the dictators who are abusing the lowest instincts of people and manipulating people. And your goal is to grow on the spiritual path, not to get manipulated, of course. So these dictators who are abusing our lowest instincts, like Stalin, Hitler, etc., are not archonites or archons. They are their servants, right? So you have like the behind the curtain. You have reptilians there, right? You have transgalactic like UFOs, almost like aliens, right, in there. So all that stuff is in Alatra, and it's all connected to, you know, higher levels of consciousness and yoga. And well, yoga is fine, right, for your body, but you know, to meditation,
psychic seeings, and elevating your psychic abilities to a high level.
We have all that stuff too.
Yeah, when I read some of their narratives, I was like, sorry for just a minute. When I read some of their narratives and I've seen some of their videos, I went like, wait a minute, I've seen that before. Exactly. And then I went back in my memory and I read like 1 year ago an article about the so-called Esalen Institute in California, Big Sur.
I've been there.
They basically repeat all their teaching and sentences, plus reptilians, UFO, and some weird shit above on the top, like cherry on the top. But the basics is like religion of no religion. Do not let manipulate. Free yourself. There is no state. No, be good.
And as you peel it all back, and I see Hi-Fi and Jim nodding, you are looking at the it's a targeted cultural deconstruction of the Western system again. So it comes in different forms, right? But the point is, again, to attack liberal democracies from a different side. We're good friends with Dr. Charles Creel and Kat Gellin, who did the documentary Disinformed, showing how the woo crew, the yoga moms, are, you know, being targeted, again, away from science. And it's interesting to me that one of the main things when you dig into this particular cult is that they are anti the science of humans being involved in any way in climate change. And I find that very interesting because, again, from what I've researched, their funding is very opaque. Well, generally, whenever there's anti-science against, you know, climate change, you can usually track it back to, you know, the fossil fuel industry somewhere.
So they are basically against the anthropomorphic, CO2, right? So they say, yes, the levels of CO2 are rising, because it's hard to deny that, because you just see the numbers of the microparticles per cubic meter or whatever, right? We all know that. But they are saying that they are rising because it's because of the core of the Earth core. Basically, it's coming from within the Earth. So it's not caused by the humans. It's caused by some weird processes no one really understands, which have something to do with our magnetic field. And so they are basically believing in alternative science, right?
Yeah, and they also say that we can make it good again by keeping our mind, connecting our minds on the planet together by our psychic power.
Well, that is the creation of the Russian noosphere idea from Russian cosmos.
And here it's get interesting, because what is in Alatra, there is a notion of what is called pan-Slovanism, right? So you have Slavic nations, Russians, Serbians, Czechs, Slovaks, Polish. We are all Slavic nations, right? Because we sort of speak, our language is in the same family of languages.
Although I would protest in our case, because we are such a mixture of everything.
No.
Like
it doesn't mean
that
we are culturally completely different. But on the language level, and there has been since 19th century, there was this push from Russia of intellectuals in early 20th century, etc., that actually Russia could sort of be the center of Slavic culture, and they are seeing themselves as that. That's why they want to conquer Ukraine and Belarus and then Poland and us as well, potentially, right? If we don't stop them in Ukraine. And so you have like this pan-Slavic sort of a layer in there, where Slavs are supposed to be the higher race, which will solve all these problems. And actually, Russians are, in fact, in their notion, the real Slavs, right? The real Slavic people. The rest are sort of spoiled a bit. But you have this notion there. And then...
we are destined to rule the world.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So you have like this notion, and it can then go probably to Alexander Dugin, but who is very far right, very, very Nazi, right? But you have like these, different sort of narratives, intersecting and potentially converging or whatever. So you have that there. And then what is interesting, that in the scriptures, in some weird books, which no one knows who wrote them, because they were written under pseudonym, basically. You have like these books where they talk, as an example, apart from the Archonites or reptilians and UFOs or whatever, they talk about Nomo. Nomo is supposed to be the Messiah, right? N-O-M-O, Nomo, is a Messiah. And they know the attributes which Nomo will have, right? He will be very social. He will be very smart. He will have very good memory of faces. He will lose, Nomo is supposed to, his character, he will lose his two brother when he is a child. And then it gets interesting even more. He will get introduced at the St. Petersburg conference, which I always forget the name of. And then he should become a president of Russia. And guess what? All these attributes fit to Vladimir Putin, or most of them. So some members of Alatra believe that Vladimir Putin is Nomo, basically. And Nomo is about to set the world order back into shape, solve the problems, and become the Messiah, and so forth.
There is also their holy book named Sensei of Shambhala, and Shambhala was that Nazi Tibetan
syncretism.
Kind of shit,
yeah. So they are basically drawing from anything what worked, right? Like QAnon would be, drawing from the scriptures of elders of Zion, or how it's called in English, right? The 19th, 20th century, basically Russian originating scripture, anti-Jewish. So they are drawing from anything what already sort of worked in the past, right? But however, what is important to say, and that's very interesting, is that so you have this really weird sort of a cult or religion, if you will, where you have reptilians, Archonites, and Nomo, and all that stuff. And basically, we are, as we said earlier, we are not so religious society, right? And people, so people would have a hard time really get deep into this shit, if I can use that word. Excuse my
There
French.
is 4% people. There is 4% people who identify as Catholics or Protestants in Czech Republic.
Right,
the rest says I'm atheist or I believe in something.
Right, but they would not necessarily. They are not so disoriented that they would jump into this weird stuff. So what they did, and this is interesting as well, that they, like in 2018-19, just before COVID, they did a large-scale survey. They are saying also that they are global. So when you come to alatra.com or whatever their domain is, or Creative Society, now I want to talk about Creative Society, how it started.
They make international conferences. There is Habsburg von Lothringen as main featured speaker, and the Lazarus, movie director Lazarus from United States. There is a lot of people international speaking in their conferences already, and they call the entering gate, the recruitment gate, they call it Creative Society.
So they started Creative Society like 3 years ago, let's say, because they realized that Alatra is too hardcore for general public. So they sort of, created this sort of a gateway drug, if you will, or this facade, which is connected underneath. People who are in Alatra are also in Creative Society, like the leaders, but Creative Society is much softer, if you will, right? So you have, but you, as an example, in all the videos in Alatra and Creative Society, you would see, or in videos of both of these bodies, if you will, you would see a guy named Danilov, who is a Russian-speaking guy, and he would always be, he is sort of a spiritual leader there. He is explaining that the anthropomorphic, that the global warming is not caused by humans, that it's caused by, the magnetic field of Earth or whatever. And what is interesting, and I think for you, Jim, it could be interesting, because I remember you describing techniques of hypnosis which they were using in QAnon. So they are
That's
not going.
That's what I wanted to say.
So they are not
He's
going
straight in hypnosis.
It looks like they are not going so far to distort, to manipulate your sensor so much. Where in some QAnon videos they would be obviously distorting this, the visuals and the sound to sort of bring you into a state of hypnosis. But they are very close to that. So imagine that there are videos where this guy, there is a Russian woman who has, God knows who she is, and she is like reading an interview, quote unquote interview with the guy. And anytime the guy is about to say something important, the camera always takes him on face basically, from the front, and he very, very intensively looks into the camera and really slowly talks his ideas and all that stuff, right? Like the TV priest of a kind, right? So we have these videos there, and then they are bringing in pseudo scientists from different countries, and from Czech Republic as well. So we have like these people who delegated during COVID, when some even like scientists were, sort of went sort of nuts and started to, basically not just but anti-vax. I mean, it's legitimate for
some scientists were paid by Robert Mercer and the CNP.
Exactly. So this type of people, we have them everywhere. So this was another Russian op. And last thing which I wanted to say, why we are talking, it's not just Nomo, who is supposed to be Vladimir Putin, but we see, and people who have the data, see that Alatra is sort of most or some of the content, the international content, originates from VK network, social network, Vkontakte, which is the Russian version of Facebook, right? Which is weird because in Russia, any religion is pretty much illegal except of Orthodox Christianity, because except of their state-controlled Orthodox Church, basically, right? So it's weird that they would let this thing grow and exist, and then from Vkontakte, then you have the content being propagated through social networks to Eastern Europe, and the more to the west you go, then the influence decreases. So in our country, as I said earlier, if you say that in the United States, 15% of people would get, sort of infected, so to speak, by QAnon, we are not in such a shape with Alatra, but still their videos have, several hundreds of thousands of views because they get spread through the Russian disinformation networks, because they are anti-system. So it fits the Russian strategy to sort of, seed distrust to institutions, science, media, and all that.
I'd like to add something, if I may, but just one sentence. I have a memory from the 90s. The Russians were always extremely obsessed with mind control. That was their shit the entire 50s and 60s, and psychology schools and Luria, and they were obsessed with this research. And I can remember in the 90s when Ronald Lauder bought or created this network of Middle European commercial TV stations. It was the first ever commercial TV on our territory. It was hugely successful because there was everything what you couldn't see before in the communist TV, so people watched it 24/7. And in the 93, 4, I'm not sure about the year, the director featured in the prime time Russian hypnotist, I don't know how to say it, hypnotist? Hypnotist, yeah, that's the word.
Hypnotist, yeah.
Hypnotist. So he featured in the primetime a famous Russian hypnotist named Kasperovsky. And Kasperovsky was a cult person who was he told about himself, I'm the healer, I can relax you and heal you. And the Lauder TV gave him in the prime time an entire time to heal through the TV the entire Czech nation. And all the grandmas in the country villages watch that, and yes, touch me, please. Yes, heal me. This is what they did in the 90s. Oh my God! And the Kasperovsky was very similar by his behavior and by his talking, by the rhythm how he talks to that Danilov in Alata.
So it's important.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on the hypnotism thing. That's a very important component of this, and it's used also by a lot of preachers here along with music. So you'll see these giant congregations of people, and there'll be a very hypnotic kind of droning music going on, and over top of it, in a very specific cadence, the preacher will insert all kinds of political ideas in the name of God. It sounds very much like what's going on here. We have a lot of these sort of dominionist preachers like Sean Fuchton. I don't know if you've heard of him, but who are basically hypnotists.
Yeah.
But they're doing it with a cloak of religion. Sorry,
I think it's very important point. And I think what's also very important, and we'll bring you back on for part 2 of this at some point, because the same network that has been attacking America, the same traitors within and without, the foreign element in collusion with what we call the fifth column here. So many of the same people are involved in what you're talking about and making appearances, whether it's RFK Bannon. I can see from your research that these same people, this network that Hi-Fi talks about, this fascist network, it's not so weird when you actually head to the top and see who's funding it and some of the characters behind it. And I just wanted to point that out. And Hi-Fi, why don't you bring us home?
Okay, we've spent the last roughly an hour talking about the tactics these people use, the strategies these people use, the fact that there are Russians deep within their networks. There's probably Russian funding or petroleum funding in their networks. It's very obvious, or at least it should be to our audience by now, that this is a global phenomenon. And, liberal democracies across the globe are under attack. This is warfare. Just because there aren't bullets flying and missiles exploding doesn't mean it's not warfare. So that brings me to my question. You have a president now, a man named Peter Pavel, who was head of, I forget, something in NATO. He was head of a NATO.
He was the highest military person in NATO. I don't know how the position is called, but yeah.
Yeah. So the highest military position. Does he see the fact that we are under attack? Is he addressing this in your country like this is a military operation and you are under attack? Or is he kind of like doing like our Joe Biden is, it'll be fine?
No.
Great question.
It looks like he, first thing, given his past and given the fact that he grew in the military diplomatic circles in NATO, he went through the trainings, of course, so he knows what information warfare is, and he seems to be behaving in a way so far, but he has been in the office only for 2 months so far, right? But he is behaving in the right way, right? So he wants to unite. And we will see the concrete steps or actions. We are waiting for them, but it's qualitatively something completely different, because what we didn't speak about is that for the last 10 years before Petr Pavel, we had Miloš Zeman, who would be a guy, former politician, former prime minister, etc. in Czech Republic. So he would be a president for 2 terms for 10 years.
And he would be basically Russian pawn.
He was basically a Russian asset, right? So he would have a person sitting next to him in the Prague Castle, where, our White House, so to speak, right? So there would be a guy who spent 90s or like around 2000, like for 10 years, he has spent in Russia. No one knows what he did there, but this guy would have a phone number to the closest Putin's allies, and he would be our former president's, closest advisor, top advisor, with no official position. So when journalists would want to ask, what is that guy doing there? What is his position? How much is he making? What is his role? The Prague Castle, the president's office couldn't even answer that, because the guy was not officially employed by the president's office. So we were in that situation.
He was the chief of the Czech Republic Lukoil, and Lukoil was the client of Cambridge Analytica.
As an example, right? So we had like these people, and now we have a former NATO guy. So quite frankly, we are in a completely different situation right now, because this clearly, sort of ties us back to the West where we belong.
So it sounds like the Czech people have realized that they're being attacked, and they have elected a pro-Western military president to put things straight. That gives me hope.
That does give me hope too. And I just think it's so incredible that you guys are doing this work, and that you have touched 400,000 listeners with your work. And I know that there is so much more that we have not yet had a chance to discuss, but we've already, we've already gone an hour, and I think this is going to give people a lot to think about. And Jim, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I'm just very grateful to get such a complete picture of what's happening in other countries. Because it's the same people doing the same thing at the end of the day. As Heidi said, this is an attack on global liberal democracy. It's an attack on the idea that human beings should care about each other. That empathy matters, that humanity is important, and so I'm just grateful that you're doing the work and gave us an insight into what's going on over there, and glad to hear that at least you have somebody in power who seems to be sane, so that's good. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good one.
Oh my God, that was an incredible hour. And this is really the heart of what RadPod does. We connect people globally with others who are in the fight to illuminate what's happening with this cognitive warfare and the war on our minds. So that was just really important. We did reach out to the cult Alatra for a response to the fact that they're, being called a psycho cult that's basically pro-Putin and anti-science at the core. We have not heard back, but if we do, we will report in a future episode. I think it's very important we end with a clip from episode 15, which is where our viewers first met Alex, and she can describe what it's like growing up in under Soviet rule. And let's just hear directly from Alex. How big of a part has this fucking dual narrative of reality and what is a paranoid fiction being sold played in, into this day that we have before us today?
I think pretty much everything around propaganda is about this, because propaganda is actually creating virtual reality around you just by two simple means: amount and repetition. So it's about the mere exposure effect. The more you get exposed to the lie or to the virtual reality they create, the more you get used to it. So first, when you hear it for the first time, you know it's a complete bullshit. When you hear it for the second time, you say, okay, it's a bullshit, but I've listened to this and sometimes before, and it's not that unknown like previously. Okay, let's put it aside, but I can think about it later. And so the completely false narrative, the trickstery, stays in your mental universe somehow on the orbit. And in the moments when you are not completely conscious, it's falling down to the center.
Shit.
Until one day you wake up and it's somehow part of your cognitive universe. You take it like, okay, it might be true, or I should probably think about it. Lots of people are talking about it, and the TV keeps repeating that. Opinion keepers keeps repeating that. So it's everything around you. And if the amount and repetition is constant and strong enough, a certain part of the population gets broken down.